We have our speakers sitting before you, and you will have some time to contemplate them while we have a
very decorous.
while we have a sort of a. Are you discussing, musing, meditating, reflecting, moments of reflection from John Cherry, and then we will go into action. So, John, reflect.
All right, well, I confess I didn't know that I was supposed to do anything or say anything official at this conference until I saw the draft program. I tried to get out of it, but I wasn't allowed to. So I'm not going to try to summarize or respond individually to this terrific set of 10 papers that we've heard today. So I see my role as getting off the podium as quickly as I can to make way for what I hope will be a really invigorating discussion in response to all we've heard today. But to get the ball rolling for this final discussion, conversation, interrogation, just a few remarks about where we are and where we're going. Now, this is the third in what has become an annual series of small get-togethers organized by the Bureaucracy Institute on the state of archaeology in country X, as I think Sue put it yesterday. We began 2 years ago with Italy, and my main memory of that occasion, aside from the brilliant wide-ranging keynote address that John Robb gave on that occasion, was a document rather like Martin Luther's 95 Theses, submitted in absentia by Richard Hodges, the former director of the British School at Rome. And it was a coruscating critique and a quite pessimistic assessment of many aspects of the way archaeology in Italy is being conducted and where it seemed to be headed as he saw it. Last year we had State of the Field Turkey, and there was likewise much frank talk. Just to give one example, our own student Müge Durusu presented a strongly worded condemnation of the then very newly passed Turkish law that allows museums to sell antiquities handed into them by the public if they're not wanted for display or claimed for study purposes within 1 year. Now we come to State of the Field Greece, and I was struck, when we were setting this up, by a certain reluctance, as I saw it, on the part of my fellow organizers and at least some of the participants to call a spade a spade. There was even, as I recall, some hesitancy about even calling this workshop State of the Field, because that phrase implies some sort of accounting or evaluation, as indeed it does. And evaluation inevitably implies critique, maybe even criticism, which, of course, might have negative repercussions back in Greece. That worry is understandable, perhaps, but I'm a bit curious about why it applies to Greece, but seemingly not to Italy and Turkey, as we saw in the last 2 iterations of this workshop. Because, of course, in those countries, too, both foreigners and nationals alike work at the pleasure of their ministries of culture. It may be mean to kick a country when it is as down as Greece is under austerity today, but neither does it seem helpful to remain silent on matters of organization, especially as organization pertains to answering our next big questions, whatever those may be. And I'm glad to see that there has been a certain amount of frank talk already. Now, those who know me will say, well, John, you're not working in Greece these days, so you can say whatever you like. And that's partly true, that I'm not working in Greece these days. Unlike many other archaeologists over the decades, actually, who have become frustrated by the Greek situation and have moved on to other opportunities, whether in Cyprus especially, or Israel, or Albania, and in my case, first Armenia and currently the Caribbean. So if that gives me some immunity from negative consequences, I'd like to say that the arrangements for the conduct of archaeological research in Greece by foreigners, I'll leave aside the Ephoreas and Greek university-based scholars here, these arrangements have always seemed to me about as bizarre and counterproductive as one might imagine. And they have seen no serious reform in decades. I mean, obviously we should acknowledge that the Greek authorities have both the right and the duty to exercise tight control over the activities of foreign archaeologists on its soil. But the process of permit allocations is both unfair and unhelpful, I think. Unfair because permits, either for excavation or for survey, but as we know, usually not both at once, which itself is, in my view, a huge problem for research design. These are issued on an equal footing only through the 16, or I thought it was 17, foreign schools and institutes established in Athens, and yet those are wildly disparate in scale and resources, as Jack alluded to in a comment this morning. There must be an order of magnitude difference in the number of trained scholars with access to funding, eager to conduct research in Greece at, say, the French or German or Italian or British or American schools compared with, say, the Finnish or the Irish or the Georgian institutes. Collaborative synergasias or even contracts to European CRM teams, which would seem to me the obvious way to increase opportunities and inject desperately needed cash into Greek archaeology, appear, if anything, more problematic than before, especially since the passage of that 2002 law, Law 3028, for the protection of antiquities and in general of Greek heritage, as it was called. Notwithstanding the recession and current austerity measures, we all know that archaeological resources in Greece are under threat from continued looting and a wide variety of development pressures, as Yanis so vividly was talking about. They're under threat as never before. And the entirely overstretched Greek Archaeological Service simply cannot cope. In fact, it has not been able to cope for many years. And that situation is now exacerbated by the recent spate of forced retirements of many of the more senior and thus more experienced members of the service. And now, as we've also been hearing, the latest news from Greece is that the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, of which the service was a part, has been subsumed within the former Ministry for Education as a new Ministry of Education and Religious Affairs and Culture and Sports. What could possibly go wrong with that? Probably everything, at least so far as direct budgetary control and adequate funding for archaeology is concerned. Now, if the present situation is as dire as it seems from the hand-wringing we already heard this morning, what are the next directions in the in this conference's title? Over the past couple of months, I've been on sabbatical leave in Cincinnati, and so I've had lots of opportunity for conversations with Jack, who, as director of the American School for the past 5 years, is probably as well informed and networked as almost anybody in this room today. And as you have just heard from what he said himself, I'm not misrepresenting his views in saying that he is extremely pessimistic about the future of archaeology in Greece. I even polled some of the graduate students down in Cincinnati, students whose own futures lie in Greek archaeology, about what they thought it might look like 15 or 20 or even 25 years down the road. And none of them could give me any answer at all. And the reason for that was that they could not imagine, maybe this is the perspective of youth, they could not imagine that Greece itself will then exist as a national entity, at least in anything like its current form, let alone what the structure of archaeological organization might be, and thus what sorts of research it might be possible to pursue from within it. Too dark a prognosis? Probably. What do I think? I have no wisdom, I don't know, I have no wisdom to offer about the political and economic future of Greece as a whole and how that may impact archaeology down the road. But whatever the future may bring, it's certainly right that we should be asking ourselves, as this conference does or is trying to do, about what the big questions are. Colin Renfrew famously spoke of the great divide between anthropological and classical archaeologies, and Anthony Snodgrass emphasized the fabulous quality and time depth of Greek archaeological data for tackling the very issues that the new archaeology had set out as its goals. Matters touched on both this morning and explicitly by Sarah earlier this afternoon. But I am quite disappointed that much of Greek archaeology remains quite introverted and somewhat hyper-specialized, and it has inserted itself on the world archaeological scene only to a quite limited extent, and I think Kathleen was alluding to that in her remarks earlier. So, whatever our future research goals and big next questions may be, I think that they should be ones that contribute not only to Mediterranean archaeology, more broadly, but indeed ones that archaeologists well beyond it will find both useful and important. So I'm keen to hear more guesses by other members of the conference in the discussion that follows about archaeologies of Greece 15 or 20 years from now. But I'm also willing to bet that most of those guesses will turn out to be quite wrong. And that's because we will assuredly be blindsided by developments we absolutely cannot foresee that will affect the very way we operate as archaeologists, how we think about our data and what we can do with them. So I want to make a point in closing these remarks, a point that I don't think has come up much today. I was very struck by a recent interview with the retired and somewhat disgraced US military general Stanley McChrystal, in which he was musing about the way the battlefield has been utterly transformed since the Gulf War at the beginning of the 90s, transformed in ways that he frankly admitted he could not possibly have imagined. And this was because of the development of three devices, just three devices. GPS, it's very important in battle to know A, where you are, and B, how to get to the enemy. Night goggles, which give you the advantage of seeing the enemy when the enemy can't see you. And thirdly, and of course most controversially in terms of current US politics, the use of aerial drones, which allows you to kill the enemy from the comfort and convenience of an office in Missouri. And I feel a little bit the same as I look back over my 40 years of survey archaeology, much of it in Greece. I'm going to sound like an old grandpa here, but it's true. Back in the 70s, our maps were all on paper. The data we collected was likewise recorded on paper. We had no choice. All our photographs were on film. In-field databases didn't become possible until the mid-1980s with the advent of the first portable computers. Affordable handheld GPS devices were still some way in the future at that point. There was no email or cell phones or texting, of course, to communicate either within the field or from the field. A little bit later, I remember arriving as new faculty at Michigan and having Sebastian Heath, who many of you know, show me an amazing new system that allowed one to view data on pages being served by a remote computer using a system then called Mosaic. So these were the first baby steps towards the internet. Some years later, I had a similar epiphany when a graduate student in my seminar blew me away by showing me something I hadn't seen before, 3D space imagery of his study area drawn from a new freely available online facility called Google Earth. Now, of course, I have GPS, Google Earth, email, the internet, and much, much more on this little device called an iPhone. Our conference is being live tweeted. Who among us could have guessed even 3-4 years ago what a tweet was, or why you would need one, or what you could do with it? So, so most of this has happened during the last, what I've just described has happened during the last 20 or 25 years or so, and at a staggering pace. So, the moral of this tale, if you will, is what will the next 20 years bring? I don't think we have a clue, although whatever it is will, of course, come to seem natural and obvious in retrospect. So, finally, I don't mean to imply at all that technological advances that we can't foresee at this point will simply push Greek archaeology towards whatever its future is going to be. It will be reshaped, of course, by future discoverers, but also reshaped by changes in our own interests as a discipline in the Greek past. So matters such as identity and hybridity and memory practices and the rethinking of terms like Hellenization and Orientalism and Minoanization and so on have had a pretty good workout lately, and we show signs of becoming tired of them. Now we're on to things like feasting and commensality and the body and sensory archaeology and archaeological ethnography. And these in turn, Yanis, I'm sorry to say, will probably become old hat soon enough. But all these things, and whatever our next questions may be, are certainly going to have to be negotiated through the art of what is going to be possible within the framework of governmental, administrative, political, economic, fiscal structures that are shifting under our feet even as we speak. So finally, Sue, I think rightly, shouted out this morning, who wants to talk about the past? Trying to force us to come back to that, and I think she was right. Why do we think the archaeology of Greece is both interesting, but also of importance, and of importance beyond Greece itself? What is it we want to know about the past? What are the deficiencies in our current knowledge of that past? What should our future questions be? And above all, how do we get from here to there? So those are a few additional thoughts above and beyond the fascinating thoughts we've had from all of our speakers. 5 more beyond the ones you see lined up in front of you. And we'll now hand over to Sue to moderate a discussion in her usual inimitable style.
Thank you. All right, so let's do this thing. It seems we have, I would just put out there 3 questions. Number 1, what are the big questions? I especially want to hear from the young folks, because it's in your, from little acorns, great oaks grow. So you are the little acorns. Number 2, John's question of, 15, 20 years now, archaeologies in Greece. And I guess I had Horton and Purcell buzzing around in my mind. Are we talking archaeologies in Greece, archaeologies of Greece? And I think we have to think about both sides of those and not simply fixate on what we're doing in the country. And third, given the parlous state, what then can we do? So I will shut up. Questions, either specifically to individual papers, but I'm hoping we can make some forward progress more globally. Who wants to roll the dice? Dr. Whitmore, who just got tenure. Yay!
These were 5 fantastic papers, and I have questions for all of you. And I wonder, Sue, is it possible to actually get the papers up online? Is that possible? Would you be willing to share your papers? Because they're very good. And it'd be lovely to have them.
Mine isn't that, ours are outlines, but especially Michael's was the terrific manifesto.
That's an issue, yeah. I mean, it has been tweeted with some, you know, what?
Some diligence.
Yeah, and apparently we're tweeting and retweeting and people are checking in. So, but I agree, more dissemination, I think that's important.
I want to just come back to the most recent paper by Jack. This question about curation, which accompanies every bit of documentation we undertake, is critical. And you know, Bruce Sterling is big on always saying that digital media will not survive by accident. In other words, you know, there's all kinds of gains that come in the digital. Let's not be crazy to deny them. However, you know, you cannot, you know, mini DV, which I used quite regularly up until last year, is now virtually you cannot buy a mini DV player. And I've got hundreds of hours of tapes that are very difficult. A lot of information there is got to be transcribed in some way. And so curation follows everything we do. And I wondered if you would be willing to comment a little more on the difference in terms of documentation, Jack, between the digital and paper-based modes. I don't, you know, in terms of returning to the paper-based, or the need for the paper-based, it's still there. It's different types of information. They're compatible. They're complementary in many ways. Would you care to comment on that in terms of your own struggles with this question of curation?
Well, I think only, that's a good question, thanks Chris. I think one important thing to keep in mind, at least in my attitude, is that it's wasteful and generally useless to imagine that you're going to digitize the entirety of an old archive. There's no reason to do it. What I think one wants to do is to make available heavy traffic items that are in paper, but the more important thing are finding aids, so that people actually know what you have and where it is. And in most cases, they'll have to come and they're going to need to request it or look at it in any case. But the first step is letting them know it's there. So we're not making any effort, and nor does the American School in Athens delude itself into thinking that even if it had all the money in the world, that it would ever digitize all of its institutional archives. There's no reason to do that. So that's the electronic archives are actually harder to wrangle than the paper archives. We started talking in 2007, very early, 2006 late, about the need to hire a dedicated digital archivist at the American School. And we began to formulate plans to serve as a digital repository, to work with archaeological projects from the beginning to ensure that they could deliver to us their data at the end of a project in a form that we could curate it and also integrate it with all other data conducted under the supervision of the school. And of course, then 2007, the crisis hit. And the whole story in Athens has been cutbacks, not additions. And we've never been able to follow through with that plan. I'm afraid that's, unfortunately, it's one of the first things to go. People in most departments, especially, this goes back to where classical archaeology and Greek prehistory is located in America. The fact that we're largely in classics departments and that we're almost always in the minority in a classics department puts us in a position of needing to sell the case to hire a staff member to philologists and historians whose priority will be typically to hire another faculty member if the money's available. And that may even be the priority of archaeologists, if given a chance to hire staff as opposed to another line faculty. But it's hard to convince them that by hiring the other line faculty, they're just aggravating an existing project, an existing problem. Because the fact that you have someone devoted to archives, it doesn't give back to the program in the immediate way that having another staff member does. those are some of the problems I see wrapped around this, and I think it's why so few programs in the States, archaeology departments and classics departments have dedicated IT staff. I don't know how many. Does Brown have a dedicated? Do you have dedicated IT staff?
No, no.
I mean,
In the institute?
yeah, in the institute.
No.
Right? I mean, I can't imagine how we could even exist without dedicated IT staff in our department in Cincinnati, because I mean that's one thing that allows us to ensure that we have similarity in design of our electronic systems.
God bless the simple.
That takes,
Yeah.
that takes,
Yeah.
that takes
University
you a
is
long
big for
way.
that, I guess.
Well, I mean, in all seriousness, right? The Semple Fund is a big pot of money, but it doesn't put us in the position of competing with the Ivies ever. Your pockets are so much deeper than ours.
Well, let's not.
I mean,
Now we're in the. Actually, you want to argue? That's the fighting words. Bruce, and then Brian.
I would pose a provocative question here as someone who doesn't work in Greece or Italy. I wonder, did the existence of the foreign schools themselves contribute this cadre of things that were created at a time in the colonial period and before, contribute to the malaise in Greek archaeology by their tradition, the creation of overprivileging of certain traditions and so forth, and at the same time trivializing the questions that get posed about Greek archaeology. And I guess there's a part of me that says, why do we still need these things? You know, they don't exist in other places, and archaeology is somewhat liberated in other places by that fact in a certain way. You don't have to worry about whether you have had the legitimacy of those schools or work within that. Is it time to ask whether these are good things in every respect?
I think they're now required by law. I mean, that we can only work as foreigners in Greece through the agency of a foreign institute. So, I mean, there's a very simple answer, and I realize that that's sort of...
Well, that's actually part of the Greek education law, which requires certain types of things to have a connection with other things, which is being changed on the other front, too. I mean, I'm not sure that because it's required, whether it's a good academic question for the future.
Well, I mean, Bruce, I was going to comment on something John said in his remarks. The great irony of this is that the Greek government wanted to change that law in 1929, and it was the American school that blackmailed them into not changing it as one of the terms for agreeing to begin the excavations in the Athenian Agora. And the reason the American school blackmailed the Greek government into not changing the law was that they felt that by allowing people to work outside the auspices of the school, that they would be drained of potential donors and resources for the school. So, you know, I mean, we asked to be controlled. And I remember in 1991 when some of us gathered in Chicago to discuss the future of survey in Greece. And we were still flying high. There had been lots of survey projects. We had a couple dozen survey projects represented. And the big news hit us like a bomb the day before the meeting, that the new archaeological law restricted surveys. And we thought we were clear and free, you know, like working in 18th century houses here, right? Because we thought we were doing something really great, right? Almost humanitarian in helping document the distribution of archaeological sites in the landscape. And all of a sudden we find ourselves regulated.
No, breed success. Yanis, then Brad.
Just because it's related to what was said earlier, I just think, Jack, that I take your point very seriously about, you know, maintaining accessible archives. But I think the idea that it's going to happen, you know, at every institution that has a scholar with a field program, that is too idealistic, and I think it would be much more likely for each foreign school to really take that on as a primary
I didn't actually say at each and every institution. What I said was major departments that have major investments in archaeology, long-term investments, and that other types of situations should look for other solutions. And I think the good solution, in fact, is the foreign schools. But that's going to mean supporting financially the foreign schools.
Right.
And the British school is in an absurdly bad condition right now financially. much worse than the Americans.
Just make one interjection on this, which everybody said that nobody working in the Aegean and classical region applies, e.g. to the NSF or similar. That may be true, although I'd have to say they do fund field work in the region because I've done it and others here. But
Well,
the key point is, part of your successful application is a data management plan. It doesn't solve everything Jack's asked about, but it's amazing how thinking about something to write for a page about that is a big step versus doing absolutely nothing, which is I think what you're suggesting. And maybe you'll never quite fulfill your ambitious data management plan, but at least you normally start off trying to have some plan.
All right, one more on data curation, and then we move on. Peter, are you on data
Well,
curation?
perhaps Yannis
Okay,
first, I
Yannis,
want
go
to
for it.
combine it with something else.
I see a kind of tendency throughout the discussion today to talk about Greece as if it's a unified entity, as if it's a thing that we all react to what's happening in Greece. And it actually mirrors, some discussions in other countries, including Greece, talk about America, as if America is, this and the other. And I think that's, it's a reflection of how powerful national imagination is in our thinking, in our terminology. There are so many different, diverse actors in Greece at the moment. So when you talk about Greece, you have to be aware of who you're talking about. Are you reacting to a specific government decision? Are you reacting to a specific kind of force within archaeological service? Are you reacting to something else? Because we have to, including me who work in a foreign institution, we have to make alliances with specific social actors in Greece against others very often, because we know that it's not us working abroad versus Greece. That's absolutely the wrong way to go about it. And many of the phenomena you talked about, actually many archaeologists in Greece suffer from as well. Yeah? So I think we have to bypass the point and kind of go beyond it. I mean, as Jack was saying, the situation is much more complex. There are political games in the foreign schools, there are political games within the Greek government, there are political games everywhere. It's how you make your alliances, based on your principles.
Network analysis is needed. Questions? Peter.
To sort of bring up something that several of the panel members or the speakers sort of referred to, I think perhaps Sarah more explicitly, but then also John talked about that sort of the wider context of Greek archaeology. Sarah was talking about classicists and, philologists and art historians and so on, but I was struck by the reference to, absence of reference to other archaeologies or archaeologists in a much wider sense. And perhaps that's where Sturt's comments about data structures and that sort of thing comes in. It is, these issues are not new, they're not unique to Greece or to Greek archaeologists. And it is, and that's where sort of my comment, what I think my reference, I was struck by what John said about the little impact of Greek archaeology on the world archaeology scene. And I sit on the editorial board of World Archaeology, and I'm struck by there's Mediterranean papers coming in sort of all the time, but there's not an awful lot of Greek papers that come in there.
Because they go to JMA.
Sorry?
You undermine them.
But it is, well, no, it's also sort of submissions and sort of, and I think those are very different journals. And, that is just something that struck me. So, comments from you. Perhaps I'm seeing it sort of totally wrong as a relative outsider, but...
Well, can I comment on that? Well, I mean, I'm not sure what the other foreign schools do, but we are forced to publish in certain journals. If you have, for example, a permit from the American school, you have to go to Hesperius. And that's another way in which the foreign schools really have this tight grip on all research that they're
I wasn't even aware of that.
I don't know if the BSA necessarily does that, but
It may be true, but I think there was a time when we weren't out there and aggressive, and classical archaeology is we can talk to anyone, mix it up with anyone, and I don't see that so much anymore. So I worry.
I think Australia takes a certain kind of articles, and since the world archaeology is thematic, and
that's true.
I don't think the sort of themes that world archaeology covers are the sort of bread and butter of Australia.
Fair enough. I'm just sort of bringing that out as another way to agree with John, and I don't know the other gentleman's name, but the foreign schools really sort of limit because we have to work through them.
That's what Yannis is saying about the threads that are making things complicated. Sir.
On an unrelated note, but also for Yannis, I was really excited by your description of your ethnographic archaeology project. Comment and a question. My comment is, it seems to me to be a formalization and a recording of something that a lot of archaeologists were doing kind of casually. You know, I was raised that it's good to go to it's good to go to Cafe Neo and learn how to play tavli, right? Because the locals are amazingly prescient about what might be around them that no one else has ever heard of yet. Outside of this small town, oh, I walk by these big rocks every day, that kind of thing. So I see a great good in actually recording part of the thought process of, it could affect what kind of decisions are made about localities for things like that. Yeah. But on the other hand, you said you did 3 years of the ethnography before you actually started the excavation part of the project.
The 3-year project was the Calabria project.
Yes,
there was also funding for me and another person, our colleague, who worked just on ethnography for 3 years. But that's rare.
Oh, okay.
Unique. In the other project I've started, which runs as on a shoestring budget,
yeah.
And we decided to do archaeological ethnography from the beginning, and we employ a social anthropologist working with us, which was a conscious decision. We don't have money to do many things, but we thought this is important to be there from the beginning.
That's great, because my question was, didn't it require a very stable permission and funding situation that is, as we're talking about, is not. If you were going to front load it with 3 years of that and then you start the project, things could completely change by the time you start, but you just kind of answered that already.
John, and then...
Yannis, I'm a little confused, and perhaps others in the audience are too, about the distinction that you would draw between, on the one hand, community archaeology, which, as you know, has grown enormously on a worldwide stage, and I've become very involved with that myself in my current work in the Caribbean. So, what's the distinction between community archaeology and what you are describing as archaeological ethnography? And so that's one question. And the second, which arises directly out of this work I've been doing more recently, and which we published in the Journal of Field Archaeology very recently. Most examples of whether archaeological ethnography or community archaeology tend to be place-based, site-based. There's a place of connection where these things can happen, whether it's performing plays or whatever it might be. How can one extend that when one is doing regionally based research, especially survey? But that's quite a puzzle to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, on the first question, the main difference is that in many cases, not in all, but in many cases, with community archaeology, people mean activities to get the local community involved directly within archaeological projects. With archaeological ethnography, it's a much broader thing and involves, first of all, listening. Doing systematic ethnographic interviews, for example, with the local community to understand their own perceptions about the material past and about archaeology. So before you implement any program of public archaeology, community archaeology, you have to understand what's happening in the region. And I think that sense of listening, understanding, getting to know the local community before we implement a project of community archaeology is important. We do that too. We have activities with schools, plays and everything. But before we do that, we listen to people, we take lots of interviews. So that's the difference, to understand. The second one, a good question. I don't do a survey, so I don't have that experience. But I would imagine if you go to a survey, you're based somewhere, right? You're located within a community or in a series of villages. So that's your immediate kind of audience, group of people you can interact with. And in our case, we're located in one village, but the site became a center for a region. And in the performances, many people from many different villages came. And it was interesting because the villages where we're staying with are also immigrants from Thrace, from Bulgaria, whereas others around it are Vlachi or local, whatever. So it was interesting to see in the performances afterwards, in the blending and the feast that followed, different dances and different music being performed on the same side by side. So the site also became a shared space of interaction for people who consider themselves different ethnically and perhaps historically. but it's, you know, it's broad.
How many grad students in the room are currently working on a topic in the archaeology of Greece? Hands up. And
Someone going like this.
sort of, like, yeah.
Was.
What? You want to expand it?
A recovering Greek archaeologist.
Someone had an intervention with you?
No, I guess Greece kind of kicked me out in a way. Is that I've had, you know, I've wanted to work in Greece for such a long time, and I've been doing it since undergrad, but we didn't get a permit. We're stuck and dead in the water, and so now I'm facing this issue where I need to get my PhD done. I have these internal pressures to be able to finish on time. And so I'm faced with the opportunity of, do I hang on to this project that may or may not continue? Or do I wind up taking the project that's a sure bet that's in a completely different country? And that looks like it's going to be Iraqi Kurdistan.
Right.
So I'm abandoning Greece for Iraq. Who would have said that? Like, within the past
Well, I guess it's a, you know, is it the question that interests you, or is it doing the work?
Yeah,
in
and
Greece?
so,
Yeah.
and the topic is cultural heritage,
Right. So it's,
archaeological heritage management, and that could be applied to anywhere. And so, in my way, I'm not abandoning Greece forever.
yeah.
I'd love to go back again, but right now, for me, at this moment, it's not going to work out. I'm not going to be able to finish my PhD or be able to do anything.
Permission from whom?
I have a question for Yanis again, and kind of bridging all the conversation on how research is constrained more and more in Greece, and funding for long-term projects is less and less. It's like if you can't work for an institution that can't, obviously. How could archaeological ethnography be adapted for application in places where maybe there is a site that was done ages ago, but there is no ongoing excavation going on? How can you kind of spread this model out to places that don't have a current excavation that makes archaeology very current in the community? How do we do that?
Well, it's difficult. You mean how we can get funding to do it, or how we can do it in terms of bureaucracy?
Adapted in the sense that there is not an ongoing excavation happening, but still we go out there and try to engage the locals and the ethnographic.
But remember what we were saying at the beginning in the morning about contemporary archaeology, and how we need to bypass the sense of that we need an archaeological site in the sense of the Bronze Age or the classical. You know, any context has materiality. Any context is kind of an archaeology of the present in many ways. So you can actually, you know, devise a project where you do have very, very good questions about, for example, 1950s. You know, why don't we have an archaeology of the Civil War in Greece, for example? Why don't we have an archaeology of, you know, more contemporary periods? You can learn so much about. In a country where the Civil War is always in the news, it's one of the main areas where historians are debating all the time about causes, the effects, and of course the consequences of the Civil War, which are still with us. You know? So why don't we do that? You know, you don't need to have an archaeological site in the commercial sense. You can say that.
But Makriolo is an archaeological site that has been explored in the context of the Civil War, correct? I mean, you've been involved in that too.
Yes. So you don't need an excavation. You need a good question, and you go and do it.
Good story. Chris.
Yeah. To go back to Professor Alex's point about sort of the need for reclaiming or reorienting the discourse about, you know, back towards cultural continuity or towards something else other than racial continuity or these sort of stupid points, you know, that are easy to get out there and people, you know, are out there willing to hear them, you know, and wanting to hear them regardless of the content. It's much harder to make a you know, valid archaeological argument without sensationalizing it that will stick and will capture people's imagination. So maybe I'd turn to you to suggest some ways, and also to Michael and Sturt for ways that new scientific information might play into this, for Sarah, ways that you beginning a new project are anticipating, you know, making this your new work public, and Jack for, you know, dealing with legacy data in a way that can capture a dialogue or a discourse and be interesting to a broader public.
Yeah, I'll ask very briefly to you. First of all, I didn't talk in favor of cultural continuity. I was just comparing the two kinds of phenomena, you know, the 19th century synthesis of cultural continuity with what's happening now is becoming more biological continuity. But I think your point is very, very important one. I think ideas like the ones I described that become popular have gained momentum, gained kind of, because there is not enough public dissemination of information on the part of archaeologists. That's why I talked about state archaeology versus public archaeology. So, for example, there is no discussion on the limitations of the biological methods we all use, on the scientific methods, and allows people like the professor of methodologies to say that you can do craniology and physiognomy to determine continuity. If people knew that these are A, outdated, B, dangerous, impossible to do, things would be different. There are a number of magazines and journals in Greece at the moment, popular magazines, that supposedly disseminate archaeological information and are completely wrong, factually, but also politically fascist, very dangerous. So we need to do more writing in magazines and newspapers about the things we do, and demystify science as well. Because the mystification of science has led people to pretend that they can do these things in some ways.
Want to react to that, sir?
To answer your
go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead. We were all asked, so we all have to answer.
Go for it.
Go ahead. Well, I was just saying, in terms of the community issue and the publicity of it, I mean, it just occurred to me with the village we're working in, and that's why I was thinking, because we're in Macariello, and I confused it with Macaroni sauce for a moment. Long Beach, as we call it, is an Asian minor community. Most of northern Greece, north of Volos, was empty urn. So these are refugee families. We arrived in the middle of the big Pontic festival. My husband feels right at home because he's from a Pontic Greek family. So here we are excavating a colony, a city that was in part of its history, a colony of, in fact, Eritreans who were expelled not only from Corcyra, but when they tried to go home. So, perhaps we should appeal to them that how would we find out about your community? You were expelled through this population exchange. What kind of traditions did you bring with, and things like that. So there's one community issue that I really hadn't thought of until this conference. But you also want to know about the science, how incorporating science and things. Maybe I should let Sturt do that, or Michael.
I got a couple of things with that. I wrote before about osteology in antiquity, and I always thought that the more that, and this would apply to anything, the more we humanize the past, that's the only way to link it with the emotions and senses of people today. I always try and kind of animate all 5 senses, although sight is the one that's most important for a lot of our material analysis. If you can't add the touch, the taste, the smell, the hearing, then it loses its holistic impact, and it resonates less with people today. So I think a way of, I do like a narrative approach to how things work, and that then forces a bigger synthesis among all the specialists in the project to feel that their work is valued, that it gets incorporated into the narrative, and that it's not just sort of a selective pick. And much of that certainly depends on really informed directorship in a project. And I've been on lots of projects, and you deal with all sorts of different directors, some of whom push you off to the side and just have you do your stuff. Others who kind of captivate your imagination and push you further to synthesize your data with others. And it's more about, I suppose, one's internal passion to link one's data with everything else that I think becomes infectious on a project and really suits things well ultimately. But it's hard to do that. I come from an anthropological discipline where human is always at the back of your brain. Well, it should be for everyone. We're all human, I think. but I think that approach, that's something that might be hard to instill with people unless it's something internal. I don't know how one can change it somehow or modify it or work with it, but I think that's the key.
Does that answer?
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Well, my few cents. Aimed specifically, I think, at future graduate type projects and practical things, because you could spend a book answering that type of question. I would observe that science, in some ways, has the opportunity to use the Apotheke mountain usefully, and B, to do things that don't involve digging holes, which right now is a bit of an issue. So on the non-digging of holes, I mean, geophysics remains an unappreciated art in most of the Greek world. I mean, of course you can point to examples, but sophisticated geophysics is not happening in Greece. You go looking in Holland, you go looking in Sweden and other places. So huge potential to do really exciting things with geophysics in a number of different technologies and ways. That's something that doesn't involve some of the issues, of course, of storage of artifacts. You still have the amount of data that comes out the far end, and currently running a geophysics project, you soon discover that a mere hard drive isn't enough to find what comes. So option one. Option two, for things like dating and stuff I was talking about, and the carbon isotope analysis, it seems like, of course, you need to start a whole new project to get it. But actually, a lot of the stuff you saw, particularly like the example of the Gordian thing, that all came from material that was collected between 20 and 50 years ago. It's a case of going through the stored samples carefully and analysing it. If it's a reasonably well-run project, you have some chance. I mean, if it's an appallingly organised historic project, fine. Sometimes a challenge. But you can do an enormous amount by one, cleaning, or even if the word cleaning doesn't quite cover it, aggressively inspecting a section with a monolith tin or something like that. All sorts of things can be done that look like high-resolution science with a pretty minimally invasive impact on the archaeological record as unexcavated at this present moment. So I think, although it costs money, of course, to run these analyses, but to pick the stable isotope one, most places in the US, if you apply a little bit of labor, i.e. you do some of the pre-processing, it's not very difficult. It involves grinding things up. This is not a high-tech science, you soon discover. You're looking at $9 to $11 a sample, basically. So of course that costs money, but actually if you multiply that by 100, you've still only got to like $1,000, and yet you'd have a world-class project potentially. If you think about that versus how much it costs to fly even one student to one site in the Aegean, it's cheap. So I would suggest that some of the science I showed isn't what probably many of you are thinking, oh, that's terrific. You've got like millions, of course you can do this. Some of that you're seeing is way cheaper than getting 2 or 3 of you in one hire car to go to one site and do something for a couple of weeks. Much cheaper.
And why am I the spoil sport? You know, you need a permit. Yeah. You need a permit to do anything systematic in the Greek landscape, even take photographs systematically of an archaeological site. You need a photograph to do remote, permit to do remote sensing. You need anything that you just said, you need a permit. And that takes you into the permitting structure. And it forces you to go up into competition against projects that involve excavation, and to convince a committee that they should waste a permit on.
But arguably, I would say that almost is the issue. At some point, one has to actually strategically say, should all the permits be going to the excavator, or should one actually say there are some intellectually more worthwhile and affordable schemes? I take your point.
Oh, exactly. and that does happen. I mean, there are arguments about the worthiness of projects.
I take your point.
But the competition's key.
But I still think it's worth considering.
Still got arrested on taking pictures, as I recall. Don't tweet that. Yeah.
I have a question for Stuart, and it's a bit of a selfish question, but I noticed you concentrate primarily on the policy. I was wondering if there are any new directions in paleoenvironmental studies for Pleistocene.
Well, as you can guess, I simply decided 3000 BC was the beginning as far as this conference was considered. So that was my basic answer.
Or even more importantly, just are there any breakthroughs on things that predate carbon-14, quite frankly? Any dating methods that are promising out there? Because one of the things I've recently confronted is they're not as safe as the textbooks might lead you to believe.
You're talking OSL dating, I assume.
Yeah, and all the other ones as well.
Okay, the answer is no. There's been no radical breakthrough in the pre-50,000 range. And out of data sources and things, I mean, the most important data source for some areas of the Aegean is the Sofala Cave, speleothem record, and some Simonos Cockaigne Cave. There are a number of speleothems coming online which are important, although so far not a single one of them is really relevant to Greek prehistory or the historical period, because they reflect the Black Sea in general climate terms. So there's scope for some new records, but none of them are actually really directly relevant, certainly not for Crete, e.g. for you in terms of looking for close tie-ins to oxygen isotope stages or something like that. probably the most reasonable hope is to point out that with careful pretreatment and processing, you can realistically now expect to get back to 65-ish thousand years ago with really good AMS dating. It's not going to get you your Homo erectus, but you're at least going to be looking at earlier modern humans. But beyond that, no, I wouldn't say there's been any radical change. Any form of stimulated luminescence type dating has massive errors compared to radiocarbon. So whenever one thinks, oh, errors, multiplied by a factor of 10, you're roughly in the right ballpark with any of the stimulated techniques.
Susan.
Sarah, question. With your landscape and your refugee community, are you looking at all at the area of the Aliakmon, your particular focus?
Well, they're fantastic travelers' accounts of
World
people.
War II.
Yes.
The Aliakmon mine. Are you planning on gathering anything?
Well, I've learned more about it from your book and from from activity up there. No, because we haven't really. But I mean, it's something that's worth discussing because of the fact that we share the shoreline with Nea Nicomedia. Paliambela was probably much closer to the sea, the Neolithic site where Mikes and Paul Holstead are working now. I haven't thought of that, but as I say, right now I just thought of the refugee area. But I do remember how important that whole concept was. So, but we haven't really started on the, as I say, the modern dimension. It's really forming as a result of this conference in part and from our just first season.
Jack, I'm going to ask you two questions. One is when you said something about getting students involved with legacy data, you said suckering. And I didn't know if you meant S-U-C-C-O-R-I or S-U-C-K-E-R.
I was meaning offloading things that we haven't gotten around to publishing.
Suckering, all right.
Suckering.
But suckering.
Also, maybe we should hear from the students. I mean, Emily, you're working on some old material from Piolos, right? You're a good example of stuff. Legacy data and suckering, maybe, or
there was some no, it's great. It was, I fully support working on legacy data. I think that that's an excellent way forward. And I actually had a. Can I tie this into a question?
Absolutely. Please do.
Just more generally, thinking about this vast amount of material that is certain to come out of the earth if we continue to dig, which I think is a good thing. But in general, with the curation problems that exist and will probably continue to exist for some time. I wanted to ask what will or maybe should be the future of the sort of total collection strategies that are being employed. I think that they're ideal and they're fantastic, but is it something that can be compromised, should be compromised, absolutely cannot be compromised in light of trying to plan for the future? Because one of the benefits of working with the legacy data, at least in my experience, is that the record is very complete. And I really appreciate that. Even things that are absent, there's a record of what's been discarded. And so, exactly, sometimes. I've been fortunate. And so I wonder whether, if it's better to, in some way, to stop and work with what we have, because we do have complete records in some cases, or whether it's possible to build future records without going to such extreme lengths that we create further problems with curation.
Could we do a vote on that?
I would realize.
How would you say it? Moratorium, or total, or in the middle.
Or if there's some way to.
Who thinks there's a potential for compromise there? I don't myself.
I think it's a matter of priorities. I mean, for the cost of one museum, you can build 50 airplane hangars and set up huge apotheques. It's a matter of allocation of resources.
But I'm assuming you're saying do the field work, but maybe don't keep everything, or
I'm
don't
just
collect
wondering,
everything, or don't.
that was the great fault of, as we've been taught, was the great fault of excavations past was discarding and not recording of material, and now it seems that the problem has become there's such a wealth and an abundance of material that it's actually crowding the apotheques, and it's actually in some cases I think overcomplicating the data to the extent that things aren't published and things don't move forward. And I realize it's a debate that's probably not going to be resolved, but I'm curious if there are any solutions that people have in mind.
Bruce, you work somewhere else. What's your?
Oh, I was going to put a separate question.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
There's actually an interesting discussion on this issue of a moratorium versus continuing with the status quo. In the Journal of Mediterranean Archaeology, not surprisingly, but not related to Greece, but related to Israel, where things really got out of hand in the 1980s. And there's a very interesting paper by Kletter and de Groot that said, we just can't cope with the data, we can't even store it, nobody's really studying it. More and more licenses for excavation and survey are being given out. And the numbers were stunning, and the article was backed up by very interesting statistical data. And we organized a discussion. We invited other scholars to comment on this proposal in the pages of JMA. So, that might be an analogous situation to look at.
I have a comment. I mean, some years ago, John Sherry, and before that, Anthony Snodgrass in 1985 and 88, one of the selling points for classical archaeology was the amazing data resource, whether to study the rise of the state or whatever the question was. One could now, again, a generation or half generation later, sort of raise the question or the response to your question would be, has all this data, let's see if I've just gone grammatical, have all these data that have been collected and stored, do they actually lead to the answering of any important questions, or do we just have a lot of data and we still don't have any answers to important questions?
I think that's what I was trying to get at. There's so much data that whether it's, do we still ask questions first and collect data in that way? Do we collect comprehensively in the hopes that a question will appear in the future? It's hard to plan.
You've been working on a ship fresco that would have been tossed onto a pile.
No. I fall in the keep everything camp, but I just wonder in this day and age whether anyone has proposed whether it's really been brought into the discussion, the possibility, or whether it's just right up.
Mac and Peter.
So I've recently come into the role of running the archaeobotany project going forward in Ashkelon, big multi-period site in Israel. And they have people who come in and analyze the animal bones. And every year they come in, they do all the animal bone analysis, they record everything that they record, and then they throw out all the bones. Every year. Because they have literally hundreds of thousands of bones every single year. So I want to do some isotopic studies of animal bones. Guess what? There aren't. I mean, I can dig some more up next year, right? But all of those prior records are gone. What if we want to go back and do some detailed morphometrics? The bones are gone. So that's the problem. They kept all the seeds. They kept all the seeds. So we have all the seeds.
They may throw them out after the finish.
No, I'm not.
My
I'm
comment
laughing.
is directly relevant to that, because I was going to take the discussions been having in survey archaeology. So if it started first, only the diagnostics were being collected, and the tile and stuff was just being counted, and then there's, okay, well, you can't do fabric analysis on your shirt count, so you need to collect all that, which leads to these enormous shirt piles of totally amorphous, whatever piece of crappy shirts. But with the bones, there's a similar issue, and I think that's where perhaps some space for compromise is. If you look at the, well, given the number of times I've looked at what sort of bone assemblages are, the percentage of identifiable bone is, how do you say, so not exceedingly large most of the time. There must be sort of a way between keeping diagnostics or keeping sort of the more informative pieces and still throw away, not keeping 100 and I don't know how many kilos of
So I don't know, you should probably talk to Chris Koch, who's working with some of Jack's, other than Jack's.
Yeah, so I'm the other half of the couple that Jack suckered. I think this goes back to John's point that we don't know where this is going to be 15 or 20 years from now. The iPhone by that point may be able to scan the worthless, amorphous, crappy shirts. And
tell you who made it.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, then you can argue, sort of, do you want to hear that 5,000 times?
Sure.
Well, yeah. Are you, ma'am? Because we're going to be running out of time.
I'm Leanne Gordon, and I'm a conservator, and I just wanted to point out to that comment. It's not from Greek archaeology, but American archaeology at Colonial Williamsburg. They have a systematic routine for reburial. So they strategically rebury tons of shirts, within the site in a mapped spatial arrangement. If they needed to go back to that material, they could find it.
Yep.
And they know where that context is from. So I just wanted to point out.
No, that's an option that, now mind you, reburial can often be discarded, but you call it reburial. So what you need in Susie.
I just want to say something about the legacy data, and you know, there is a value that all these mountains have been collected, and from my very small experience in working in the Athenian Agora, for so long, I was touring Europe in conferences, hearing about, lamenting about the lack of data and so many questions that when I started opening the boxes in the Athenian Agora, questions were answered. The answers were always there. They were packed, but nobody had time and the manpower to actually go through them. So I think there's something valuable in returning and, you know, dealing with these collections while we're, you know, running around the landscape, spending money and doing new excavations to answer our questions. Some of these answers are already there. They're already excavated.
I wonder if it would be worth having a small conference or workshop on legacy data, just to have some good examples of it, because we all talk about it, but, you know, apart from Jack Suckers, I don't really know. You know, I don't know, and so best practices, how you do it, what you get out of it. Yeah, Susie.
I think this goes back to and intersects with maybe then the, you know, the political structure and for, you know, the what's in place for working with this legacy data, because I've actually been trying to get access to material in Greece for stable isotope studies on animal bones, and I just keep getting told no. And, you know, but so what's, you know, we need to think about as well, you know, the point of keeping these things and archiving these things, but then also making them easily available to people that want to work on them.
Anthony.
There's a famous Renfrew quote, which I have cited more than once, that these data were collected to answer, quotes, yesterday's questions, if any, close quotes, to which I think the response is perfectly obvious. Never mind why they were collected. It's up to us to find the new interesting questions which they can also answer.
The power of serendipity. Ma'am?
Anastasia. I just wanted to add that from experience in a research data management program at the Institute of Archaeology, where there, because of the REF, researchers have an incentive to deposit their data in the institutional repositories that are being created, because such funds only universities can find, or in the subject repositories, which is the Archaeological Data Service in New York. And then in order to increase the finding possibilities, they write data papers that also count in REF research output as well as data. So there they have the opportunity to develop more thoroughly methodology and usability. And we had a really excellent case from South America where Marcos Martino Torres was able to reuse data from a museum that were collected for insurance purposes and reuse them for archaeological purposes. There's so many good cases. The Journal of Open Archaeology data is there. Andrew Bevan's project in particular has been published already, so it's
good to, it's just like to validate it, because, you know, one question I hate to ask, but, you know, would someone who works on legacy data for the doctorate be as attractive on the job market as someone who goes out and digs a great big hole? Yeah. You know, that's a Mac.
Yeah, just a brief comment. I mean, if there are so many wonderful things about the archaeology of Greece and about the work that's been done and about the potential for understanding all of these questions, maybe a new future contribution of Greek archaeology is the future of big data in archaeology, right? We have all this stuff. Now can we come up with new ways to take all that stuff and turn it into something useful in a way that, you know, it's not 5,000 bits on the same exact tiny little piece of data, but it's something that is emergent from all of that massive data.
Sir.
I know that we arrive at the end that we are all tired. I think yesterday when I lectured, we were all not tired. On today's discussions, I could add that probably the crisis in Greece would be a moment for change. Too many things. I showed how Thebes, which was the cursed place in Greece from previous stories, would be transformed in a kind of quiet place where everyone was urged to study. And this voice was going to the ministry, and we had opened seriously, and not for making fuss and so on, many fields where, for example, was the publication of the corpus of the inscriptions of Boeotia. not of course with our forces. Many times these projects found problems not before of the F48 or even of the great masters of the ministry. Of course, we had problems, and I had 30 years, 30,000 problems, and I still have trials open because only I tried to answer and go sending someone to take antiquities of Boeotia who were in Tripolis. And then, of course, I made somehow the points in the history of Greek archaeology, criticizing, but saying at the same moment that I understand the questions in which Keramopoulos was working his archaeology, because the conditions were so. So I recognize that we have not bad laws, but people who don't respect, don't apply the laws in Greece. And we have also bad archaeology and bad archaeologists. This is true. The question is where we can go and transform, if you accept that Thebes was positive and will not be more probably, transform everything. This is the human, and also in our science ideal, to transform every place in what could be. Of course, not everyone in the F48 can do research, I mean, from the people who have to work. We were working. We were, personally, 18 hours, probably in 24. Yeah, I was a special case, yes. I had a family in another country and so on, and I was dedicated. But that's something different. But I was open to every question and so on. And this is the history of archaeology. We have, from some decades, a way to apply the law which is not correct. But many problems also, I mean, problems which Hamilakis touched, problems which were decades before. I mean, even the way to theorize myth and history and mixing everything came to Greece from abroad. Because the schools worked, there were, as you all know, excellent Greek archaeologists, thousands and thousands, who were and knew every draft of the world progressive archaeology, educated and working day and night in Germany, later in France, and later in the United States and England and so on. And these are not some cases. I mean, for example, I heard that there was an application which was not accepted. These are not, I know very well every, point of what happened in Greece in the last 30 years, we can say, if no, unfortunately more. But of course, these are not right things. Phenomena like the Chrysiabi, Aurora d'Oro, or gold, and so on, are historically happened, always. We had a great civil war, we had before problems, Greek history from Paparyopoulos, even before. From someone showed the first archaeological ephemeris, it was Stavros. We had continuously. But we knew how to, and of course, I think you understand what I mean.
I think I do. For a retired man, you remain passionate and somewhere not we will survive. We have to talk about how to survive. Yes.
And of course, political situations I approve personally. I did have a help. Persons Hamilakis know where helped these situations. Of course, will change. This is what we see.
Yeah, I love your optimism, Vasily, and I want to be with you on that. But I think we do need to talk about these phenomena. We can't just say, oh, ignore them because this is something that's going to go away, as many other phenomena did. No, we need confrontation. We need to understand what kind of, Absolutely. But I want to say something about change, because you said that crisis could be an opportunity for change. Absolutely. The question is the direction of change. Because one direction, which is not impossible, and be careful what you wish for, is for the archaeological service to be completely destroyed, completely privatized. We get in situations where we'll have competitive tendering, as we have in many other countries, and we'll have the euphemistic principle of preservation by record, which means complete destruction, basically. You go on and do, within a week, completely recording, and everything is destroyed. We have seen that phenomenon everywhere.
Then
so at the moment,
will happen everywhere, not only in Greece.
But Greece has amongst other problems, has the very big advantage of having a service for protection which still has the authority, although undermined now, authority to physically protect antiquities. We take it for granted, but look at what's happening in other countries.
Everything changed in this, can change.
Of course.
Even the constitution changed tomorrow.
Yes, but I'm in favor of still public, not private archaeology. I'm sorry, but I have seen private archaeology in the UK. I have spoken to thousands of colleagues who work, itinerary archaeologists, who get fired every day, and I don't want that system to happen in Greece. I don't want archaeology to be as it is in Britain. It has no authority. I mean, Anthony can talk about
Anthony,
it.
Yes?
Yeah, I just echo every word.
We've heard from our keynote. You guys want to, what do you think? A little bit more? Wrap it up? What do you think?
Some more urgent questions.
Urgent.
Those of you had
I mean, we've heard from our keynoter. Chris, where are you going?
Well, just to follow up on that quickly. As I understand it, Yannis, that when the FREA is doing rescue excavations, they do hire on archaeologists for the period. So there is a large population of archaeologists in Greece already who are hired on to help the FREA when they do it.
Yes.
But as I also understand it, depending on the FREA, if you are a foreigner and you work under the system of rescue, then you can do that. You can actually go, and as long as you're working on that rescue project and bringing in money in certain situations, that's a possibility. Is that correct, Silis? I mean, is that?
A lot of things are not possible at this moment, but this is because there are people in the government, if you like, who pass from one government to the other, which they don't like anything to be as we believe. So this is not a question. These fears that the FOH will become private or that they will be under the nomarchies, I mean the prefect, or all this. I have never had any fear. The question is different. The question is that many people who have not open minds. This is the question.
Boy, when your keynoter ends saying, this is the question, I think you feel like you've come full circle somewhat. However, are the organizers? Sil? Question? Anything to say? Alex? Fotini? You got a little on
and I want Alex and Sil to comment, because here we sat hearing John saying that we avoided criticism. So I cannot end this conference without answering to that. Obviously, after so many talks with John, we still haven't convinced him that the reason why we didn't want this title of the state of the field was not to hide criticism. Especially with the list of speakers, you do, I think, understand that criticism we would have. But the idea was that, yes, we could have 48 hours of commiserating and criticizing, and yes, it would be lovely. But for all of us who work in Greece, and we know these situations, the idea was to try to think if we can go beyond that. I mean, in this political and economic environment, can we do archaeology? Can we go back this summer? So it was more about, okay, given the situation, what it is that we can do. And I think Yannis also mentioned a very important thing, which with criticism, and especially constructive criticism, is very important. But we don't want, because we all work in Greece and we know exactly from young colleagues who do everything in their power to do very decent archaeology, that we don't want to put everybody in the same bag, right? And by criticizing Greek archaeologists or archaeologists doing, including so many categories of people, because that's not fair. I reflected on John Cherry's reflection, so I'm covered.
So could I make Fotini feel a little better by issuing an invitation to her, which builds on a comment that Bill Caraher meant. For 30 years or so, we've been hearing, we who do survey, that we can't possibly have dated our later artifacts correctly because we have missing periods and things. We just haven't looked hard enough. You now know what those later periods look like to an extent that we never did before. This is a marvelous opportunity to exploit legacy data from a whole range of survey projects. Go back, have at it, tell us what we did wrong, we'll welcome it.
I love looking at these days. I love it.
Just one very quick comment, which is to say precisely that happened years ago in another country, where people who had been working on the same periods had started to recognize in central Italy these later periods. They went back to the Tiber Valley, where Tim Potter and others had been surveying, and look and behold, what sort of wonderful data and work has come out of that. Although critically, they were able to follow it up with some additional field work, which was not blanket large-scale field work, but very sophisticated, targeted excavation and survey, a combination of those things. And I think those sort of elements are critical to combine those things. But I think it would be a great idea to see that sort of thing happening.
All right, reflections?
I had just a question for Yannis. I really enjoyed the first part of your talk, well, all of your talk, but especially the first part with the images you saw. And I've been wondering for several years in Greece now, the TV stations with the pyramids of the Argolids and
of Thebes,
the tunnels, and everybody asks you the spilia that goes from the Acropolis to the beach, and my grandfather talked about it. But also people like Antonis Georgiadis, for example, who's been occupying the scene as a dangerous politician for years, and he has his own private canal, TV station. He's making money out of his books, which are bestsellers. And I've been, asking myself, do we have to do more in order to occupy more of the scene in Greece and really, just step up and say a few true things? And when you compare with other European countries, I mean, for example, France, somebody claiming that the skull of Vercingetorix looks like the skull of de Gaulle would never have access sometimes to TV, for example. And should we do more? And could be true, we have to prove it. But concretely, how can we do something in that direction too?
I think this what can we do, and do we, from Jared Diamond
a book, a great book, which was translated in Greek, which is of completely archaeological fullness, comes from Cambridge University Press. Sorry, this requires my birth island, and it is Ulysses about Odysseus Liomenos, like Prometheus. And this comes from Cambridge University Press. So I have now to give a lecture in Kefalonia, but I believe no one will come. Because the question is to put in bad conditions Kefalonia and Ithaca, completely fool our minds that in the 7th century, in the Mycenaean period, the island of Kefalonia was cut from a place of mountains 800 or 1,000 high, and it was a different island, the part in which I was born, in the west part of the island. So it was Ithaca. And this is Cambridge University Press, more than 500 pages, everything from books and with special visitors.
This is the revenge of Oxford.
This is only one of the million things that happened of this time.
All right, Yanis, I'm going to let you have, you want to...
A brief response to,
A brief response, and then we're going to wrap this up.
No, it's okay. I think you're absolutely right that we do need to do more. And when we did ethnography, for example, at Poros in Calabria, the famous triangle of the three temples of Poros and Sunion, whatever, came up in many, many conversations. But the idea is not to say to these people, you are stupid, you don't understand. These are the things that the fascists feed you. No. You're trying to understand why this person feels so strongly about this. And then you realize that there is a vacuum here, which the archaeological service unfortunately has created, all of us, all archaeologists. That is, these people, they feel a strong, urge to have a more direct and more material, sense of the archaeological past that has not been satisfied, has not been fulfilled. Because of the distance that heritage industry overall creates, not in Greece, everywhere, between people and the archaeological find. So they do need to gain that direct access to material past, and then through discussion with them, get them to understand that these things with the triangles are all rubbish.
We say to educate.
Yeah, but not in in a sense of a dialogue.
We know how to do this, even for the pyramids. Mr. Georgiadis, of course, this deputy of the member of the parliament, made a lot of questions, parliamentary questions, to me, practically. I was we could discuss for years about how we live every day these problems. And we know very well how to answer, at least me.
Time Team Greece?
So,
Greece
constructed pyramids. It is too easy. Greece created other very important.
I want to thank the organizers. I also want to thank Sarah and Diana, who are hanging out there watching the fun and who have been laboring to set this up and knock it out of the park.